accused of 3 murders, but only convicted of 1, the killing of her son. The charges of poisoning her husbands were never proven in a court of law. Melker was accused of 3 murders, but only convicted of 1, the killing of her son. The charges of poisoning her husbands were never proven in a court of law. It was William Sproat, the younger brother of her second husband Robert, who accused Melker because he wanted Robert's will in favor of Melker declared invalid. Melker refused to refund an alleged loan from her mother-in-law, Jane Sproat, to Robert. She regarded it as a gift and argued that it was not stipulated in the will as a loan. William won the civil case regarding the will, which ran concurrently with the murder trial, and was awarded costs. Melker withdrew on the date Justice Greenberg sentenced her for murder. Williams was a Pyrrhic victory, however. To pay her exorbitant legal costs, Melker had to sell off all her assets. She was declared insolvent and was eventually buried in a pauper's grave. Daisy Melker, a.k.a. Daisy Hancorn Smith, was born on the 1st of June 1886 in Seven Fountains, in what was then the Cape Colony. She was one of 11 children. When she was 12, Daisy went to Bulawayo, Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, to live with her father and 2 of her brothers. 3 years later, she became a boarder at the Good Hope Seminary School in Cape Town. She returned to Rhodesia in 1903, but soon moved to the colony of Natal and enrolled at the Berea Nursing Home in Durban. On one of her holidays in Rhodesia, Daisy fell in love with a young man named Bert Fuller, a civil servant in the Native Affairs Department at Broken Hill. They planned to marry in October 1907. However, Fuller contracted blackwater fever and died with Daisy at his bedside on the very day they had planned to marry. Fuller left a will bequeathing £100 to his fiancée. In March 1909, about 18 months after Fuller's death, Daisy married William Alfred Cowell, a plumber in Johannesburg. She was 22 and he was 36. The couple had 5 children, 4 of whom died. The first 2 were twins who died in infancy. Their third child died of an abscess on the liver, and the 4th suffered convulsions and bowel trouble and died at 15 months old. Their last and only surviving child, Rhodes Cecil, was born in June 19th. Early on the morning of the 11th of January, 1923, William Cowell became ill soon after taking Epsom salts prepared by his wife. The first doctor who attended Cowell did not consider his condition serious and prescribed a bromide mixture. But Cowell's condition deteriorated rapidly. He took a turn for the worse soon after the doctor left. Daisy summoned the neighbors to help and called for another doctor. Cowell was in excruciating pain when the second doctor arrived. He foamed at the mouth, went blue in the face, and screamed in agony if anyone touched him until he died. Faced with these symptoms, the second doctor suspected strychnine poisoning and refused to sign the death certificate. A post-mortem was subsequently performed by the acting district surgeon, Dr. Fergus. The cause of death was certified to be chronic nephritis and cerebral hemorrhage. Daisy, the sole beneficiary of her husband's will, inherited £1,795. On the 11th of January 1926, 36-year-old Daisy married another plumber, Robert Sproat, who was 10 years her senior. In October 1927, Robert became violently ill, suffering excruciating pain and severe muscle spasms similar to those experienced by Cowell. Robert recovered, only to suffer a second attack a few weeks later after drinking beer in the company of his wife and stepson Rhodes. He died on the 6th of November, 1927. Dr. Malinik, the attending physician, certified that the cause of death was arteriosclerosis and cerebral hemorrhage. No autopsy was performed. Following Robert's death, his widow inherited over £4,000, plus a further £560 paid by his pension fund. On 21st January 1931, Daisy married for the 3rd time. Her husband was a widower, Sidney Clarence Melker. Like her 2 previous husbands, he was a plumber. Late in February 1932, Daisy had traveled from Germiston on the East Rand to Turfontein to obtain arsenic from a chemist. She used her former name, Sproat, and claimed that she required the poison to destroy a sick cat. Less than a week later, on the 2nd of March 1932, Rhodes, aged 20, fell ill at work after drinking coffee from a thermos flask his mother had prepared for him. A fellow worker, James Webster, also became violently sick. Webster, who had drunk very little of the coffee, recovered within a few days, but Rhodes died at home at midday on the 5th of March. A post-mortem followed, and the cause of death was given as cerebral malaria. Rhodes was buried at New Brixton Cemetery the following day. On the 1st of April, Melker received £100 from Rhodes's life insurance policy. Daisy's motives for killing her son Rhodes remain unclear. In the case of her first two husbands, the motive, if indeed she killed them, seemed to be financial gain. Rhodes seems to have been under the impression that he would come into an inheritance at age 21. One theory is that he was demanding more than his mother could give him and was becoming a burden to her. The most obvious answer is that he had become a disappointment to Daisy. She had pampered him all his life, but he rarely showed her any consideration in return. By this time, Daisy's former brother-in-law, William Sproat, raised his suspicions concerning his brother Robert's death to the authorities. On the 15th of April, 1932, the police obtained a court order permitting them to exhume the bodies of Robert, Cowell, and Rhodes. Rhodes's remains were found to be in an unusually good state of preservation, which is characteristic of the presence of arsenic in large quantities. A state forensic pathologist was able to isolate traces of arsenic in the viscera, backbone, and hair. Although the bodies of Cowell and Robert Sproat were largely decomposed, traces of strychnine were found in the vertebrae of each man. Their bones also had a pinkish discoloration, suggesting that the men had taken pink strychnine, which was common at the time. Traces of arsenic were also found in the hair and fingernails of James Webster, Rhodes' surviving colleague. 1 week later, Melker was arrested and charged with the murders of all three men. Public interest in the case grew, and newspapers gave the story a great deal of coverage. The Turffontein chemist, Mr. Abraham Spilkin, from whom she had bought the arsenic that killed her son, contacted police after he recognized Melker from a newspaper photograph as being Mrs. D.L. Sproat, who had signed the poisons register. The Melker trial lasted 30 days. 60 witnesses were called for the Crown, and less than half this number for the defense. To present the forensic evidence, the Crown employed the services of Dr. J. M. Watt, an expert toxicologist and professor of pharmacology at Witwatersrand University. In summing up before giving his verdict, the judge pointed out that the Crown had been unable to prove conclusively that Cowell and Sproat had died of strychnine poisoning. "It does not convince me, nor does it convict the accused," he said. On the third count, however, he had come to the inescapable conclusion that Melker had murdered her son. This was evident because Rhodes Cowell had died of arsenic poisoning. The coffee flask held traces of arsenic. The accused had put the arsenic into the flask. The defense of suicide was untenable. When the judge finally turned to pass sentence on Melker, her face went pale, but she still proclaimed her innocence. Melker was condemned to death by hanging. The sentence was carried out on the morning of the 30th of December, 1932, at Pretoria Central Prison.